All right, welcome back, everyone. We're going to be diving deep into the world of project management today.
Sounds good.
Specifically, project integration management.
Okay.
Working with Chapter 4 of this project management guide.
Yeah.
And it's really all about how to make sure that your projects don't just finish,
Right.
but that they finish well.
Yes, exactly. That's the key, isn't it? Getting everyone working together.
Yeah. And I have to admit, when I first saw project integration management, I was like,
Yeah.
oh, this is going to be a lot of jargon.
Mm-hmm.
But I have to say, as I was digging into the chapter, I was like, wow, this is actually like the big picture stuff.
Right. It is.
This is about strategy and decision making
Absolutely.
and making sure your project isn't just like a bunch of tasks, but that it's really like a cohesive whole.
Yeah. And one of the most interesting things the chapter highlights is that in a lot of areas of project management, you can delegate stuff, right? But when it comes to integration, that's really where the buck stops with the project manager. They can't hand that off.
So they're accountable for everything from start to finish.
Exactly. Start to finish.
Wow.
They're the ones that need to see how all the pieces fit together and how decisions in one area might affect others and how to keep the project aligned with the organization's goals.
Okay, so big responsibility.
Big responsibility.
This chapter breaks down 7 key processes within project integration management.
Yes.
So where do we even begin?
Well, it all begins with the project charter,
Okay.
which is, it's basically the project's birth certificate.
Okay.
It formally authorizes the project, gives the project manager authority to use resources.
So you need that green light before you can really get moving.
You got to have it.
But
Yeah.
what I found really interesting was how the chapter talked about how all the different things that can trigger a project in the first place.
Oh, yeah.
It's not always just like a planned, thing.
Not at all.
There could be like a market demand.
Yeah. Sudden shift in market demand.
A new technology emerges.
Oh, absolutely. A new technology.
Or even like legal requirements.
Yep, like new regulations.
Yeah. And I was thinking like a company that suddenly needs to like revamp its online security because of new data privacy regulations.
Oh, perfect example.
That would be a project that's being triggered by outside forces.
Exactly.
So you need to have that charter in place, whether it's proactive or reactive, right?
You got it.
Yeah. So it's like the foundation you build everything else on.
It is. Yeah.
So speaking of building, then the next step would be to develop the project management plan, right?
Yeah, that's right. Yep, the project management plan.
And that's where things start to get really detailed.
It is, but before we get into the specifics, I think it's important to emphasize that the project management plan isn't just this static document that you just create and then file away. It's a living, breathing guide that evolves throughout the project.
Okay, so it's not set in stone.
No, definitely not. Because things change, right? You get new information, you encounter unexpected roadblocks, priorities shift. The plan needs to be flexible enough to adapt to those changes.
Right, but how do you keep things under control if the plan is constantly changing?
That's where this concept of baselining comes in.
Okay.
So you establish your initial plan, your baseline, and then you have a process for managing any changes to it.
So you're not just changing things on a whim.
No. There's a process, right?
Okay, and I see in the chapter they're talking about some common pitfalls in creating these plans.
Oh, yeah.
And I'm always curious about that, about learning from other people's mistakes.
Yes.
So what are some of those pitfalls to watch out for?
I think one of the biggest ones is making the plan too rigid.
Okay.
Like, if you try to account for every possible scenario up front,
Right.
you'll end up with a document that's so complex and inflexible it becomes useless.
So it's about finding that balance between being comprehensive but also adaptable.
Yes, finding that balance.
Okay, and is there anything else?
Well, another common mistake is not getting enough stakeholder buy-in.
Yeah.
You might have a brilliant plan,
Right.
but if the key stakeholders aren't on board, you're setting yourself up for trouble.
Right, because they're the ones who have to approve it and sign off on it ultimately.
Exactly.
Okay, so let's say you've avoided those pitfalls.
Okay.
You've got your project charter, you've got your flexible but well-defined project management plan.
All right.
What's the next step?
So the project management plan, it outlines a whole bunch of subsidiary plans.
Oh, yeah.
Right? You've got your plan for managing the scope, the schedule, the cost, quality, resources, all of that.
So it's like having a master blueprint, and then each of those is like a detailed drawing for a specific part of the house.
Yes, exactly. That's a great analogy.
Okay, yeah.
And the project manager is responsible for making sure all those drawings are consistent, and that they all work together.
So it's kind of like conducting an orchestra.
Yeah, like conducting an orchestra.
You got to make sure all the instruments are playing in harmony.
Yeah, they're all playing together at the right time.
Okay, so we've got the foundation, we've got the blueprint, we've got the orchestra.
Right.
Where does the actual work fit into all of this?
Well, that brings us to the third process, which is direct and manage project work.
Okay.
And this is really, as the chapter describes it, this is where the rubber meets the road.
Okay.
So this is about taking that plan and putting it into action.
So this is where the project manager transitions from being a planner to being more of a leader.
Yeah, absolutely. They're guiding the team, managing interfaces between different parts of the project, making sure any approved changes are implemented effectively.
And that's where things can get really interesting because no matter how well you plan, there are always going to be unexpected challenges,
Always.
changes.
Right. So this process is so dynamic.
Hmm.
You're constantly collecting work performance data, analyzing it, making adjustments as needed.
Give me an example of what kind of data we're talking about here.
Sure. So let's say you're tracking costs on a construction project. Okay.
Okay.
So you might have data on labor hours, material expenses, equipment rentals, things like that.
Okay.
But that data, that raw data, only becomes meaningful when you compare it to your budget, to your schedule, to the work that's actually been completed.
Right. So it's not just about collecting the numbers. It's about understanding what those numbers mean in the big picture.
Exactly. And that's where the project manager's analytical skills really come in.
Yeah.
They need to be able to interpret the data, identify trends, and then make decisions about maybe how to adjust the plan, how to allocate resources.
So direct and manage project work is about bringing the plan to life, but also being flexible and responsive to whatever happens.
Yes, it's a balancing act.
Now, speaking of twists and turns, let's talk about one of the areas of project management. I think that's sometimes misunderstood,
Okay.
which is managing project knowledge.
Yeah, that's a good one.
And I have to say, when I first saw that, I thought it was all about documentation, making sure everything's meticulously recorded for future reference.
Right.
But it's actually a lot more than that, isn't it?
It's a lot more than that. It's really about tapping into the collective intelligence of your team and organization.
So it's not just about what's written down. It's about the experience and the expertise of the people involved.
Exactly.
And one of the things I found interesting in this chapter is the way they distinguish between explicit and tacit knowledge.
Yes. That's such an important distinction.
So what's the difference?
Okay, so explicit knowledge is the stuff that's easy to articulate,
Okay.
The processes, procedures, facts, and figures. Like a recipe, right?
Okay.
You can write down all the ingredients, write down all the steps, and anyone can follow it.
Right.
Tacit knowledge is a little bit different.
Okay.
That's the stuff that's harder to pin down, right? It's the intuition, the experience, the know-how that comes from years of working in a particular field. Like if you think about a chef,
Okay.
a really seasoned chef, they can just tell when a dish needs a pinch more salt or a splash of lemon juice.
Yeah.
They can't necessarily explain why, they just know.
They just know, yeah.
Exactly. And that kind of knowledge, that tacit knowledge, incredibly valuable in a project, but it's much harder to capture and share.
And it relies on people feeling comfortable enough to share that knowledge.
Yes. And that's why fostering a culture of knowledge sharing is so crucial.
Yeah, and that requires trust.
It does.
People need to feel safe to speak up
Absolutely.
without fear of being judged or criticized.
Yeah. It's all about creating that environment.
Okay, so we've got the project charter, we've got the plan, we're managing the work,
Uh-huh.
we're tapping into collective knowledge.
All right.
What's next?
Now it's time to talk about how we keep everything on track.
Oh,
right?
Uh-huh.
How do we make sure we're heading in the right direction? And that brings us to monitor and control project work.
And this is about keeping an eye on things, making adjustments as needed.
Yeah, pretty much. Constantly tracking progress, comparing it to your plan, taking corrective action if things start to veer off course.
Okay.
It's like, if you're a doctor, you're constantly checking the patient's vital signs and making adjustments to the treatment plan based on how they're responding.
So you're looking for those early warning signs.
Yeah, absolutely. Looking for those red flags.
Okay, so this is not just a one-time thing. This is an ongoing process.
Ongoing, yes, throughout the entire project life cycle.
Okay.
And one of the biggest mistakes project managers make is thinking that monitoring and controlling only happens at the end of a phase or the end of the project. By then, it's too late.
You can't really go back and fix things.
Exactly. So it's about being proactive,
Yeah.
constantly looking ahead, making those small course corrections along the way.
Now, the chapter makes a distinction between monitoring and controlling.
Yes.
So what's the difference?
Yes. I think of it this way. Monitoring is like checking your speedometer, checking your fuel gauge, checking your mirrors when you're driving.
Okay.
You're gathering information, right?
Yep.
About what's happening around you.
Okay.
Controlling is like steering the wheel, braking, accelerating.
Mm-hmm.
You're taking action based on the information you've gathered.
So monitoring is about awareness.
Yes,
And controlling is about taking action.
exactly.
Okay, so we've got our charter.
Yeah.
We've got the plan. We're managing the work.
Mm-hmm.
We're tapping into collective knowledge. We're keeping an eye on things with monitoring and controlling.
Right.
What else could there be?
Well, there's one more piece of the puzzle,
Okay.
and it's absolutely crucial,
Okay.
especially in today's world,
Uh-huh.
and that's managing change.
Ah, yes. Change, the one thing we can always count on in a project.
Right. You can plan all you want, but change is going to happen.
So how do we manage that change effectively without letting it derail the entire project?
That's where the next process comes in.
Okay. And that's perform integrated change control.
That always sounds kind of intimidating to me, I have to admit.
I understand.
Integrated change control.
It does sound a little bit scary, but it's really not that bad.
Okay.
Think of it this way.
Yep.
It's like having like a set of tools and guidelines
Okay.
to help you navigate those wouldn't it be great if moments.
Do you mean like when someone suggests adding a new feature or like, oh, we need to shift the deadline because...
Yeah, exactly.
And your heart sinks a little bit.
Yes. And instead of just, reacting emotionally or making a snap decision, integrated change control gives you this framework to assess those requests thoughtfully
Okay.
and to make informed choices.
So you're not just saying yes to everything.
No, you're taking that step back. You're evaluating the potential impact. You're making sure that any changes actually align with the project goals.
You're being strategic, not just reactive.
Yes, exactly.
So what does a typical change control process look like? Usually it involves documenting the change request
Okay.
and then evaluating its impact, on things like scope, schedule, budget, risk, and then making a decision.
Okay. And who makes that decision? Is it always the project manager?
It depends.
Okay.
In some cases, the project manager might have the authority to, just make the call.
Uh-huh.
But in other cases, there might be a designated change control board.
What is a change control board?
Sometimes it's called a CCB,
Okay.
and they're responsible for reviewing and approving change requests.
So it's like a panel of experts who can weigh in on the decision.
Yes, exactly. And that can be really helpful, especially when you have, multiple stakeholders.
Right, because they all have different perspectives.
Exactly. Different priorities.
Okay.
The CCB can weigh all those factors and make a decision that's in the best interest of the project.
Now, something I've always been fascinated by with projects is just how much documentation is involved.
It is amazing, isn't it?
It seems like there's a constant stream of updates and revisions, new versions of things.
So much paperwork, right? But that's where configuration management comes in.
Configuration management. Okay, and that always sounds a little technical to me.
I know.
What exactly does that entail?
Okay, think of it this way.
Okay.
It's a way to create a detailed history of your project documents
Mm-hmm.
and deliverables.
Okay.
You're documenting every change, every version,
Mm-hmm.
so you can always trace back and see how things have evolved over time.
So it's like having a time machine for your project documents.
Exactly.
You can go back and see who made what changes and when and why.
That's right.
And that seems like that would be really helpful for a lot of reasons.
It is.
You want to make sure everyone's working with the latest version.
Absolutely. Especially when you've got multiple people working on different parts of the project.
Yeah.
And it can help prevent errors,
Yeah.
Like if someone accidentally overwrites a file or makes a change that needs to be reversed, you can just go back to the previous version.
So it's like a safety net.
It is. It is.
Now, I imagine in today's world, with so much collaboration happening online, there must be tools that can help us with this.
Oh, yeah. There are all sorts of tools and systems now that can automate configuration management.
So it's not just about manually tracking changes.
No, not anymore.
Wow.
There are sophisticated software solutions that can track every revision, every comment, every approval.
So it makes the whole process a lot easier.
It does, much more efficient and reliable.
Okay, so we've talked about managing change requests, managing documentation.
Mm-hmm.
What about the final stage of the project? When we get to kind of tie a bow on everything
Yes.
and celebrate.
That's the fun part.
That's the close project or phase process, right?
Yes, that's right. Close project or phase.
Okay, so I imagine this is where we get to pop the champagne, pat ourselves on the back.
There is definitely an element of celebration, but it's also more than just a formality. It's about formally closing out all the activities confirming that the project achieved its objectives, and capturing those valuable lessons learned along the way.
I love that they emphasize that because it's
Yeah.
so easy to just get caught up in the whirlwind of the project
It's true.
and forget to think about, like, what did we learn from this?
Yeah, it's so important to take the time to reflect
Right.
and capture those lessons learned because they're like gold, you know?
Yeah.
They can help you improve your processes, avoid repeating mistakes, become a better project manager in the future.
So it's not just about documenting what you did, it's about documenting what you learned.
Exactly. What went well, what could have been done better.
And share that knowledge with others.
Yeah. Share it with your team, share with your organization.
So when the chapter talks about administrative closure,
Yes.
what does that actually involve?
It's basically like tying up all the loose ends, you know?
Oh.
Archiving project documentation, releasing resources back to the organization, completing any contractual obligations, making sure everything is finalized, properly documented.
So it's like closing the books on the project.
Exactly. Leaving a clean slate for the next one.
So close project or phase, even though it's at the end,
Yeah.
it's a really important part of the whole life cycle.
It is. It really is.
Okay, now remember earlier we talked about some of these emerging trends in project management.
Yes.
And I'm curious, how are these trends impacting project integration management specifically?
Oh, well, one trend that's having a huge impact is the rise of agile and adaptive methodologies.
Okay, now I've heard a lot about Agile, but I'm still not entirely clear on what it is or how it relates to all of this.
Okay, so agile it's a mindset, it's a way of working that emphasizes flexibility,
Okay.
collaboration, iterative development.
Okay.
It's about responding to change quickly and efficiently, and delivering value incrementally throughout the project.
So it's a different approach from the more traditional waterfall approach,
Yeah.
where you plan everything up front and then you just kind of execute in a linear fashion.
Exactly. Agile is all about embracing change
Okay.
and adapting to it, which I think aligns really well with the principles of project integration management.
So how does project integration management work in an Agile environment?
Well, the core processes, they remain the same,
Okay.
but the way they're applied might look a little different.
Uh-huh.
For example, the project charter in an Agile project, it might be a more high-level document that sets the overall direction.
Right.
And then the detailed planning happens in shorter sprints or iterations.
And the project management plan might be more of a living document that's constantly being updated.
Yes,
Okay.
exactly. And communication and collaboration become even more crucial in an Agile environment
Okay.
because the team's constantly interacting, making decisions together.
So it's not just that it's compatible with Agile, it's essential for Agile.
It is. It provides the framework.
That's fascinating.
Yeah.
So even though the tools and techniques might vary, the underlying principles remain the same.
Exactly.
And that's what makes it so powerful.
It is powerful.
Okay. And before we move on, I want to touch on one more thing that the chapter highlights, which is tailoring considerations.
Oh, yeah. Tailoring is important.
What does that mean?
Well, it's all about recognizing that no two projects are exactly alike,
Right.
and that we need to be flexible in our approach to project integration management.
So you're customizing the processes and tools.
Yeah, to fit the specific needs of each project.
Okay.
And the chapter lists several factors to consider when tailoring:
Like what?
the project's life cycle,
Mm-hmm.
its development approach, the overall management approaches used by the organization.
So it's about finding the right balance between structure and flexibility.
Yes,
And that probably takes a lot of experience to know how to do that well.
it does, yeah.
Okay, well, this has been incredibly enlightening.
Good. I'm glad you...
We've covered a lot of ground here.
Yeah.
Core processes, emerging trends, this idea of tailoring.
A lot to think about.
And I think one of the biggest takeaways for me is that project integration management is not just a set of rules.
No,
It's not just a methodology. It's a way of thinking.
it's a mindset, yeah.
It's about approaching projects holistically, seeing how everything's interconnected.
And making sure it all works together.
And that's something that I think can benefit anyone, not just project managers.
I agree.
Right?
Yeah.
If you're leading a team, organizing an event, even just trying to get things done in your personal life,
Absolutely.
these principles can be really valuable.
Yeah, it's about bringing order to chaos, fostering collaboration.
All right, well, I'm going to toss it back to you now for a final thought-provoking question.
All right, here's one for you.
Okay.
Think about all the projects you've been involved in,
Mm-hmm.
either professionally or personally, okay?
Okay.
What's one common thread that you've noticed in the projects that have gone really well? And what's one common factor in the projects that have maybe struggled or failed?
Oh, That's a great question to reflect on.
It is, isn't it?
Yeah.
It gets you thinking about what really drives success, no matter what kind of project it is.
And we'll definitely be digging deeper into those insights and more in part 2 of our deep dive.
Looking forward to it.
But for now, I want to encourage everyone listening to take some time, ponder that question,
Yeah, think about it.
and see what you discover.
It's amazing what you can learn from your own experiences
Absolutely.
just by taking a step back and reflecting.
All right. Until next time.
See you then. It really does get you thinking
Yeah.
about what works and what doesn't.
Right, and what we can do better next time.
Exactly. And that leads us perfectly into what we're going to be talking about today,
Wow.
which is keeping those projects on track, even when, well, things happen.
Because they always do.
They always do.
That's right. So we're talking about change management.
We are.
And specifically, the process the chapter calls Perform Integrated Change Control,
Yes.
which I have to say, that name always sounds a little bit intimidating.
It does, doesn't it? Integrated change control.
Yeah, I don't know. It just...
But think of it this way.
Okay.
It's like having a set of guidelines or tools
Yeah.
to help you navigate those. Remember those wouldn't it be great if moments we talked about?
Oh, yeah, those can be scary.
Yeah, where somebody suggests adding a new feature.
Right. Or, oh, we need to shift the deadline because...
Exactly. And you just feel your stomach drop a little, right?
Yeah.
Because you know it's going to throw everything off.
It's going to be a lot of work to figure that out.
Exactly. And so instead of just reacting emotionally or making a snap decision,
Right.
integrated change control gives you that framework
Yeah.
to really think it through,
Okay.
assess the request,
Huh.
make an informed choice.
So you're not just saying yes to every request that comes along.
Nope, not at all.
Okay, good.
It's about taking a step back,
Mm-hmm.
evaluating the potential impact, making sure any changes actually align with the goals of the project.
Being strategic instead of just reactive.
Yes, that's a great way to put it.
Okay, so what does a typical change control process look like?
Well, usually it involves a few key steps.
Okay.
First, documenting the change request,
Oh.
right? Somebody says, hey, wouldn't it be great if you write it down?
Okay.
And then evaluating the impact of that change on things like scope, schedule, budget, even risks.
Okay.
And then finally, making a decision about whether to approve it, reject it, or maybe defer it.
So it's like a series of filters, right?
Yeah, a series of filters to make sure that only the most important and valuable changes get through.
I like that analogy. Okay, so who makes that decision?
Well, in some projects, the project manager might have the authority to make that call on their own.
Right.
But in other cases, like in more complex projects or in organizations that have tighter controls, you might have what's called a change control board
Change control board.
or a CCB.
Okay.
And that's basically a group of people who are responsible for reviewing and approving change requests.
So it's kind of like a panel of experts who can provide a more objective assessment.
Exactly. Because they can look at it from different perspectives.
Yeah.
And they can weigh the pros and cons and make a decision that's in the best interest of the whole project.
That makes sense, especially when you've got lots of stakeholders involved.
Yeah, because everybody has their own priorities, right?
Right, exactly.
So the CCB can kind of balance all of that out.
Now, something I always find kind of fascinating about projects is just how much documentation there is.
Oh, it's incredible, isn't it?
It's like a constant stream of updates, revisions, new versions of everything.
Right. I mean, it can be overwhelming sometimes, keeping track of it all.
Right. So how do we do that?
Well, that's where configuration management comes in.
Configuration
Oh, yeah.
management.
Yeah. And I know it sounds a little technical,
Yeah, it does.
but think of it this way.
Okay.
It's basically a way to create a detailed history of your project documents
Mm-hmm.
and deliverables.
Okay.
So you're documenting every change, every version, so you can always trace back
Huh.
and see how things have evolved over time.
Like a time machine for your document.
Yeah, exactly. You can go back and see who made what changes when and why.
Okay, now that seems like it would be really helpful
It is.
for a lot of reasons.
Absolutely.
First of all, to make sure everyone's working with the most up-to-date information.
Yes. Especially when you have a lot of people collaborating.
Right.
And it can help prevent errors. You
Yeah.
know, if somebody accidentally overwrites a file or makes a change that needs to be reversed, you can
Mhm.
just go back to a previous version.
So it's like a safety net.
It is a safety net.
And I imagine in today's world, with so much work happening online, there are tools that can help us with this.
Oh, absolutely. There are all sorts of tools and systems now that can automate configuration management.
Wow. So it's not just about manually tracking changes in spreadsheets or folders anymore.
No, not at all.
So tell me about some of these tools. What can they do?
Well, there are these sophisticated software solutions
Okay.
that can track every little revision,
Hmm.
every comment, every approval.
So that makes the whole process much more, efficient.
Efficient, reliable.
Okay, so we've talked about managing change requests,
Yeah.
managing all this documentation.
Mm.
What about the final stage of the project when we get to kind of wrap everything up and celebrate?
Ah, yes, the close project or phase process.
Close project or phase?
That's always a good feeling, right?
Yeah, it's like, we did it.
We made it.
So what happens during that phase?
Well, it is a time for celebration,
Okay.
but it's also more than just a formality.
Okay.
It's about formally closing out all the activities, confirming that the project met its objectives. And this is really important, capturing those lessons learned.
Yes, because we talk about how important that is.
It is so important because it's so easy to just, rush on to the next thing
Yeah.
and forget to take that time to reflect.
Right. And what did we learn from this experience?
Exactly, because those lessons learned, they're like gold. They can help you improve your processes, avoid making the same mistakes again.
Right. So we should be documenting not just what we did,
Uh-huh.
but what we learned, both good and bad.
Exactly, and then share that knowledge
Right.
with your team, with your organization, so everyone can benefit.
Okay, so when we talk about administrative closure,
Yes.
what does that involve?
Well, it's really about tying up all the loose ends,
Okay.
archiving the documentation, releasing resources back to the organization, completing any contractual obligations,
Yeah.
making sure everything is finalized and properly documented.
So closing the books,
Yeah, closing the books on the project.
leaving a clean slate for the next one.
Exactly.
So close project or phase, even though it seems like it's just the end.
I know, it can feel that way.
It's actually a really important part.
It is.
Okay, now I remember earlier we were talking about some of these emerging trends in project management.
Oh, yeah.
I'm kind of curious, how are those trends impacting project integration management specifically?
Well, one trend that's having a huge impact is the rise of agile and adaptive methodologies.
Okay, and I know we talked about this a little bit before,
We did.
but can we just kind of recap what Agile is and how it relates to all of this?
Sure. So agile, it's really more of a mindset,
Mm-hmm.
a way of working
Okay.
that emphasizes flexibility, collaboration, iterative development.
Okay, so it's different from that traditional waterfall approach,
Yes, it's very different from waterfall.
where you plan everything up front and then execute it in a linear way.
Exactly. Agile is all about embracing change and adapting to it.
So how does project integration management work in that kind of environment?
Well, the core processes of project integration management, they're still relevant, but they might be applied a little differently.
Okay.
For example, the project charter.
Mm-hmm.
In an agile project, it might be a more high-level document
Okay.
that sets the overall direction,
Okay.
and then the more detailed planning happens in those shorter sprints or iterations that are common in agile.
Mm-hmm. And what about the project management plan?
That might be a much more living document
Okay.
that's constantly being updated and refined as the team learns and adapts.
So it's really about embracing that flexibility and adaptability
Exactly.
that's so inherent to Agile.
It is.
Okay, so it sounds like project integration management isn't just compatible with Agile, but it's actually essential.
Absolutely. It provides that framework to make sure all the pieces of the agile puzzle fit together.
That's fascinating.
Yeah, it's an interesting dynamic.
Okay, now before we move on to our final thoughts,
Right.
I want to touch on one more important concept that the chapter highlights, which is tailoring considerations.
Oh, yeah. Tailoring is key.
What does that mean?
Well, it's about recognizing that no two projects are exactly alike
Right.
and that we need to be flexible
Mm-hmm.
in how we apply project integration management.
Okay, so we're customizing those processes and tools.
Exactly, to fit the specific needs of each project.
And what are some of the things we need to consider when we're doing that tailoring?
Well, the chapter mentions several factors.
Okay.
The project life cycle, the development approach being used,
Mm-hmm.
the overall management approaches of the organization.
So it's about finding that right balance
Yes, finding that balance.
between structure and flexibility.
Exactly.
And that probably takes a lot of experience.
It does, yeah. It takes judgment experience.
Okay, well, this has been an incredibly insightful discussion.
Good. I'm glad to hear that.
We've covered so much ground, the core processes, these emerging trends, the importance of tailoring.
It's a lot to digest, I know.
And I think one of the biggest takeaways for me is that project integration management isn't just about following a set of rigid rules.
No.
It's not just a methodology, it's a way of thinking.
It's a mindset.
It's about looking at the big picture, seeing how all the parts are connected.
And making sure it all works together.
And that's something that can benefit anyone,
I agree.
not just project managers, right?
Anyone who's trying to get things done.
Yeah, whether you're leading a team, organizing an event,
Absolutely.
even just managing your personal life.
The principles can apply anywhere.
All right, so as we get ready to move on to the final part of our deep dive,
Okay.
I'm going to turn it over to you for a thought-provoking question for our listeners to consider.
All right. Think back to a project where you faced a significant challenge.
Okay.
Or a major change, How did you handle it?
Okay.
And how might applying the principles of project integration management have helped you navigate that situation more effectively?
That is a fantastic question.
It is, isn't it? Because it really makes you think about how you could have approached things differently.
Yeah.
Maybe achieved a better outcome.
Yeah, and we're definitely going to be digging deeper into those reflections
Absolutely.
in the final part of our deep dive.
Looking forward to it.
But for now, I want to encourage everyone listening to just take some time to ponder that question
Yeah. Give it some thought.
and see what insights come up.
You might be surprised at what you discover.
Okay, until next time.
See you then.
Yeah, it really gets you thinking about those past projects and what you could have done differently.
It does. And it also highlights how valuable these principles can be,
Yeah, for sure.
Even if you've been managing projects for years, there's always something new to learn, a new way to approach things.
Absolutely. And speaking of approaching things in a new way,
Right.
I want to go back to something we talked about earlier, the role of the project manager.
Oh, yeah, that's key.
This chapter really emphasizes how important they are to project integration management.
They really are. It's not just about being, the one in charge.
Right.
It's about being the integrator.
Okay.
One who can see how all the different parts of the project work together and make sure they're all in sync.
Yeah. And I remember the chapter really stressed that project integration management can't be delegated.
Right. You can't outsource it.
You can't outsource it. Yeah.
It's the project manager's responsibility.
And why is that?
Well, think about it this way.
Okay.
Imagine an orchestra without a conductor.
Okay.
You could have all the most talented musicians in the world, but without someone to guide them,
Yeah.
bring them all together,
Yeah.
you're not going to get a beautiful symphony.
Right. So the project manager is like the conductor. They're
Exactly.
making sure everyone's playing the right notes at the right time.
Yes, they're setting the tempo, keeping everyone in sync, and making sure the whole performance comes together beautifully.
And just like a conductor needs to understand each instrument,
Yeah.
the project manager needs to understand each of those project processes.
Yes, and be able to make those tough decisions, adapt to changes, keep everyone motivated.
Keep everything moving forward.
Yeah, it's a challenging role.
Yeah, but it sounds incredibly rewarding.
It is. When you see a project succeed, it's a great feeling.
This deep dive has really given me a much better understanding of project integration management
Good. I'm glad.
and all the different aspects of it.
Yeah, we've covered a lot.
Yeah, and I think the most important takeaway for me is that project integration management, it's not just a set of rules or a methodology.
No,
It's really a way of thinking.
it's a mindset, yeah.
It's about approaching projects holistically, seeing how everything's connected.
Making sure it all works together towards that common goal.
Yeah, and that's something that I think would be valuable for anyone,
I agree.
not just project managers.
No, not at all.
If you're leading a team,
Yeah.
organizing an event, even just trying to manage your own life.
Absolutely. Those principles apply everywhere.
Yeah, because it's all about bringing order to chaos, right?
It is.
Creating alignment,
Mhm.
fostering collaboration.
That's what it's all about.
Well, we've reached the end of our deep dive.
It's gone by fast.
I know. I feel like we could talk about this for hours.
Me too. But I hope you found this journey as insightful as I have.
I have, for sure.
It's been a pleasure sharing these ideas with you, and I hope you continue exploring this world.
Yeah,
There's always something new to learn,
absolutely.
new ways to improve your project management skills.
And the most important thing is to take what you've learned here and apply it.
Yeah, put it into practice.
Yeah, don't just let this be an academic exercise.
No, experiment.
Yeah,
Try new things. See what works for you.
and never stop learning, right?
Never stop learning.
Okay, well, thank you for joining us on this deep dive into project integration management.
It's been a pleasure.
Stay curious, keep exploring, and we'll see you next time.
See you next time.